Good evening. Thanks for joining us. This is NTD Business, and I'm Paul Greeny. A security firm says over $200 billion in jobless benefits may have been stolen through fraud. What should you do if someone files for unemployment in your name? Are America's megacorporations indirectly helping China's Huawei succeed? We talked to a 5G entrepreneur. And in-person gym classes reopened today in New York City, but the city's mayor is against the reopening. And much more coming up on NTD Business. The CEO of Goldman Sachs has responded to complaints by junior bankers about long hours, and unrealistic deadlines that have affected their mental health. He told employees he'll enforce a rule to make sure they have at least one day off a week. He also says he'll hire more people and move staff around to support the busiest divisions. The response comes after reports last week that junior bankers said they were working almost 100 hours a week to keep up with the huge workload. They also claimed their superiors were abusing them. Some said they were likely to quit by the summer unless conditions improved. We'll keep you updated. And Wall Street rallied on Monday as tech stocks rebounded from that recent sell-off. The Dow closed up 103 points, 0.32%. S&P 500 gained 27 points, 0.7%. The Nasdaq added 162 points, to 1.23%. Tesla gained 2%. Influential investor Cathie Wood's ARK Invest raised the car maker's price target. Railroad operator Kansas City Southern surged 11% after a Canadian company agreed to acquire it. That'll create the first railway spanning the United States, Mexico, and Canada. The 10-year Treasury yield fell 5 basis points today to around 1.68%. So Treasury yields fell back a little today after the recent rally. Lower yields make it less expensive for you to get a mortgage, you pay less on your credit card debt, etc. It also means governments pay less interest on new debt. So the Federal Reserve has been artificially keeping rates low by buying massive amounts of Treasury bonds. But on the flip side, that's inflating the money supply and devaluing the dollar and your savings and your wages. But the Fed says it's worth it to stimulate the economy and get us back to full employment. Vance Ginn is the former Associate Director for Economic Policy at the Office of Management and Budget. He's now the Chief Economist at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I asked him, is artificially suppressing rates a problem?
I do believe it's a long-term problem, and it's a problem today, honestly. I mean, this is distorting economic activity, creating situations when people are buying assets when they otherwise wouldn't because interest rates are so low. They're getting checks sent in the mail. Recently, $1,400 for an individual. That money is going to go somewhere, right? And it's oftentimes going to go into some assets. If you think about the unemployment benefits that are being spent, all those money are just adding on to the national debt. To your point, means that the Federal Reserve is just going to monetize, meaning buy a lot of those bonds in the secondary market, increase the money supply, which puts more money and liquidity into the system at a time when we don't have a liquidity problem. The economy is growing. Things are getting back on their feet. States like Texas are reopening, and that's really how you get more job creation and economic activity. And then you put a pro-growth economic agenda of less taxing, less spending, and less regulating to really get the economy going instead of these one stimulus after another. We can't continue down this route. It's making us more dependent on the federal government. It's creating a situation where many people don't want to work because they can get more money from unemployment benefits and rebate checks than otherwise. And ultimately, it's meaning less investment by business entrepreneurs because they don't know what interest rates and the state of our economic system is going to be in the future.
Some argue that by keeping the rates low, it makes it cheaper for the government to service their own debt. Is there an argument there for that?
That's true, and it's one that's often heard where some would say that deficits don't matter, right? The interest rates are so low, we're not really paying that much, and so we can get a rate of return if we spend that money into the private sector. And there's some truth to that. However, we have to also remember that each one of those dollars is not coming from the government. The government doesn't have money. The money has to come from the private sector. Whether that's today or tomorrow, it's coming from the private sector, and that rate of return is always greater than whatever the government can put money into, including on interest on the debt. And so we should have more money that's kept in the private sector, not elsewhere, because the Federal Reserve, when they monetize a lot of this debt, the money doesn't come in like a helicopter and just drop cash among everyone that's in the economy. It goes to financial institutions first, in particular, and a lot of that money doesn't trickle down elsewhere. What ends up happening is you get the stock market tends to see an increase in inflated prices overall. The bond market, keeping those bond prices up so yields can be lower than otherwise. The housing market, which we seem to see another sort of percolating bubble that's along the way, and other sort of assets. I think what we could see is us contributing to a problem, much like we had in the 2000s, where you prop up all these assets, and then where do they have to go? Nowhere else but down. And I don't want to see that for American families. I think that we've got to pick out a better way. And honestly, I spent a few years in the White House, and I think what the Trump administration was doing was helping to turn things around with tax cuts, deregulation that took place. Congress should have done a better job of spending restraint, and I hope that we can get onto that now. But that's kind of the path forward that we should be taking, not this path toward more federal dependence, but whether it be the states or local governments or individuals, it should be about independence, self-sufficiency, and dignity of work that will allow for more prosperity for the future.
Very good. Vance Ginn, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Don't tell Vance Ginn, but $200 billion of the pandemic unemployment benefit could have been stolen by fraudsters. One expert says that's more than 3 times what the government is estimating. NTD's Colin Fredrickson reports.
Whenever the government hands out free money, people lie to get some, and it's happening right now.
Serious concerns about suspected fraud, including instances of accounts established with stolen identities.
Computer security firm ID.me has found that a massive amount of unemployment benefits are being pilfered.
We're talking about at least $63 billion in fraud, which is a low-end estimate, and potentially $200 billion or more. It's just this enormous level of, unintentional payments that weren't supposed to go to these people that are nevertheless taxpayers' money that is being wasted.
To put it into perspective, in 2019, the U.S. spent about $28 billion in unemployment insurance benefits. Many are filing for unemployment benefits using someone else's name, and there are fewer checks on eligibility.
There are criminal enterprises that are engaged in this fraud, but it's not only those criminal enterprises, it's also fraud, or we'd say abuse and misuse of the program as well.
Maine Senator Susan Collins says California's fraud problem is especially bad. It has a 9% unemployment rate, and yet almost 14% of the labor force is filing unemployment benefits each week under the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program.
There can be no excuse for the kind of rampant fraud that has been so prevalent in California.
Collins says California has an estimated $11.4 billion in fraud, far more than any other state. She blames the state's policies.
They're paying UI benefits before determining if the applicants are eligible.
If you believe your identity has been used to claim benefits, contact your state unemployment insurance system. Colin Fredrickson, NTD News.
Drug maker AstraZeneca said Monday its vaccine is 79% effective in preventing symptomatic COVID-19. The vaccine was developed with Oxford University. The results might help rebuild public confidence in the AstraZeneca shot and move it a step closer to getting U.S. clearance. Last week, over a dozen countries, mostly in Europe, suspended it after a few dozen people who received the shots developed blood clots. Countries later resumed their use of the shots after a European regulator reviewed it. The review says while it couldn't rule out a direct link to blood clotting, it said the benefits of using the vaccine outweigh the possible risks. AstraZeneca says it'll apply for FDA emergency use authorization early next month. And so the country continues to reopen. Fitness centers in New York City, of all places, can now offer in-person classes again. But not everyone's happy about it, including the mayor. NTD's Arian Pastar has the story.
Today, in-person classes like kickboxing, for example, are reopening in New York City. So gyms have been open for quite some time, but in-person classes were still banned. Last week, instructors from the yoga, Pilates and dance industry gathered in front of City Hall to protest that. They say they were forgotten. New Yorkers we spoke with had mixed reactions to the city's current speed of reopening.
We should wait till vaccines are out for everyone and then reopen. I also think it's crazy people are eating inside already. I don't think it's time for that yet.
I go to the gym with my daughter and we love it. So we're really happy it's open.
I think most of them are closed arbitrarily without much thought or science behind it. Just the politicians being afraid to have it open.
I just want the pandemic to be behind us so we can get rid of these masks and live like normal human beings again.
Neighboring New Jersey is halting its reopening. The Garden State has the highest per capita number in cases nationwide. New York City's mayor would like to follow their lead when it comes to indoor dining and other industries.
In the city now, getting up to 50%, certainly we got to stop there. That would be my strong view.
The mayor is against bringing back in-person classes. His health team says it's dangerous because people are very close to each other and masks could slip off their sweaty heads. But the governor overruled the mayor's decision, giving in-person classes a pass. Ariane Pastar, NTD News, New York.
A new report details top Biden officials' ties to America's tech giants. His national security advisor apparently has multiple links to Microsoft. Government documents show Jake Sullivan served on an advisory council for Microsoft from 2017 through to just last year. Sullivan holds between $50,000 and $100,000 of stock in both Microsoft and Google's parent company, Alphabet. He also owns between $15,000 and $50,000 of Facebook stock. An official said Sullivan is divesting all of his stock holdings now, though. He's overseeing the government's response to a cyber attack on Microsoft's email software. And also, the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says it was paid at least $5,000 as a communications consultant for Lyft. Sullivan's portfolio probably performed pretty well last year. President Trump was an outspoken critic of what he called collusion against him by big tech and the Democratic Party. So Trump being Trump, he says he's just going to start his own social media platform. That's what one aide says anyway. NTD's E. Young takes a look.
Trump spokesman Jason Miller told Fox News former President Trump will launch his own social media platform in 2 to 3 months.
This is something that I think will be the hottest ticket in social media. It's going to completely redefine the game, and everybody is going to be waiting and watching to see what exactly President Trump does, but it will be his own platform.
Miller did not say what the name of the company will be. Several social media companies silenced Trump following the breach of the Capitol on January 6th, including Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Snapchat. Trump hasn't said whether he will return to other platforms conservatives favor, such as Gab, MeWe, or Parler. Last month, Trump speculated in an interview with Newsmax that Parler couldn't mechanically handle the number of users he would bring. Miller said to pay attention to Georgia on Monday, March 22nd, because Trump is about to make a big endorsement.
5G entrepreneur Declan Ganley says the Biden administration is keeping the pressure on China's Huawei. Of course, the Trump admin likewise traveled the world telling allies not to use Huawei in their 5G networks. But Ganley says that alone isn't enough. He says there needs to be additional reform in the 5G industry to prevent China from dominating. But he says it's actually American and European megacorporations that are blocking that reform. They don't want to upset their Chinese business interests. Ganley is the CEO of Rivada Networks that's competing in the 5G space here in the US and in Europe.
It's one thing to go in and warn allies about the risks of allowing Huawei 5G into your economy. So the UK listened and acted, and the UK has not allowed Huawei 5G. It actually reversed its decision. It had said it would allow them in, and then it changed its policy and said it wouldn't. But other countries like Brazil had adopted the clean network policy, said they were not going to allow them in, and then in January changed direction on that. And the reason that we are seeing that happen is because, and Boris Johnson, Prime Minister Boris Johnson talked about this. He asked the US delegation, this is a year ago, during the Trump administration, what's the alternative? What's the alternative to this model that the Chinese are supporting? And the answer is to move off one-off spectrum auctions and instead move to a royalty system and have open access, wholesale 5G networks that can be privately financed using shared spectrum, and that's very technical, but there is an answer, and that is the answer, but the US has as yet been unable to give that answer because AT&T, Verizon, and Deutsche Telekom, who own T-Mobile in America, do not want that answer because they have a captured market in America, which has got some of the highest mobile phone prices on the planet, and they want to keep those prices high, and they want to keep their cartel's control of the US wireless market by keeping prices high, and they do not want this new model coming into wireless because it will create a much more competitive wireless industry in the United States. So they lobbied the Trump administration very successfully to make sure that this didn't happen under the Trump administration. So what happened is when Mike Pompeo and others went out and argued for what was smart policies in terms of banning Huawei, when they were asked the question, what's the alternative, they didn't have a credible answer. And the reason they didn't have a credible answer was because AT&T, Deutsche Telekom, and Verizon were lobbying against that answer being provided in the United States itself.
Wow, incredible.
And by the way, this applies across multiple industries. I know the wireless industry is the industry that I know best, but this is going on in other industries. And one of the other carrots that the Communist Party of China dangles is access to its market. So there were reports after a huge lobby was put on over the Christmas and New Year holidays to get the European Union's investment pact approved by the European Commission, which its investment pact with China approved with the European Commission. The German media reported that Deutsche Telekom may be the recipient of a wireless franchise license for the whole of China, which would be the first non-Chinese operator to have a license. So, that's extremely valuable to the stock price of a company like Deutsche Telekom. AT&T owns HBO, Time Warner. They want to sell movies. They want to sell HBO into that Chinese market. That's absolutely massive. None of these companies want to upset President Xi. None of them want to risk being denied access to the Chinese market. And so the Chinese Communist Party has very clearly shown, and it did it literally today in terms of sanctioning those members of the European Parliament and Europeans who have had the temerity to stand up to the Communist Party of China and say, you are guilty of genocide, you are abusing human rights in Hong Kong and Tibet and in other parts of China, you're suppressing religious freedom, you're doing all of the things that you are doing, calling them out for it. And they're saying, the Chinese Communist Party is saying, you're for us or you're against us. And corporations that are large, that are not big innovators, but that have big market share and can only grow by increasing that market share into China, they do not want to incur the wrath of President Xi or the thugs that run the Communist Party of China. They're afraid of them, and they're afraid of them because they want their money, they want access to their markets, and they are lobbying our own governments in the West to not employ policies that ultimately would be a threat to the Communist Party of China's plans for expansion and global domination.
Incredible. Declan Ganley, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've reached out to AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile. Didn't get a response yet, but we'll keep you updated. And China is apparently buying more oil from both Iran and Venezuela on the black market. It's a test for Biden's foreign policies. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
The Wall Street Journal reports China has increased its oil imports from Iran and Venezuela sharply, citing US officials. One industry expert says in a period of constrained supply, China can get discounted oil on the black market from these countries.
If the oil's on the market, they'll buy it. Why would they care what the U.S. thinks? The U.S. and China are at a low point in their relationships. China can basically put the finger in the eye of the U.S. Secretary of State in Alaska, put the finger in the eye of the president, Joe Biden, and that's what they're doing because they can. It's as simple as that.
Data company Plecker says China is expected to import over 900,000 barrels a day from Iran this month. That'd be the highest amount since the U.S. imposed an oil embargo against Iran 2 years ago.
The U.S. has lost any influence with respect to Iran or Venezuela over the last 20 years. This is not a new phenomenon. I don't lay this blame on Biden. I don't lay the blame on Trump.
He says over 20 years ago, Iran and Venezuela went their own way.
They have their own destiny in mind. They have their own principles and their own authoritarian prerogatives in mind, and that's what they will pursue.
He says there is no central trading information system to track oil trade.
So a lot of trading can happen, under the table, behind closed doors, where nobody knows it's happening. And then ships suddenly appear empty, fill up with oil in Iran or Venezuela, and then suddenly disappear, often with a name change or with turning off of the international navigation system.
Hofmeister says China views the US as a declining empire, and the regime will do what it wants and only follow laws it deems appropriate for itself. He says the US could send out ships to confiscate China's black market oil, but he warns that could create a heightened level of anxiety and international stress, which could have other consequences. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
California's 2 U.S. senators want President Biden to set a date to phase out gas-powered cars. They say the federal government should follow California's lead. Governor Gavin Newsom last year ordered a ban on new gas-powered vehicle sales by 2035. The letter is from Democratic Senators Alex Padilla and Dianne Feinstein. They also urged Biden to restore California's authority to set clean car standards. President Trump revoked California's authority to set its own fuel efficiency limits. The state of California sued him for that. The White House is trying to rewrite vehicle emissions rules slashed under the Trump admin. And shortly after taking office, Biden ordered U.S. agencies to revisit fuel efficiency standards. That's still to come this evening. If you think you can go 24 hours without any screen time, this is the challenge for you. You could even get paid a handsome amount for doing it. And tourists trickle back onto Hollywood's Walk of Fame. Theaters are now open in LA County, and it's starting to look a little less like the scene of a pandemic. That and more coming up after the break.
During the 2008 recession, Americans lost over $2 trillion from their 401ks. For many people, retirement was no longer an option. But do you know what tried and true investment nearly doubled its value following the recession? Gold. Protect your money. Buy gold. For your free direct bullion guide to buying gold, call 1-800-757-7050. Start your collection today. We can't control political volatility, inflation, massive government debt, or the wild swings of the stock market. But we can control where we put our money. Gold is easily outperforming the stock market the last 20 years. Protect your money. Buy gold. For your free direct bullion guide to buying gold, call 1-800-757-7050.
Trends may be fleeting, but values are timeless. We now bring you this new clothing brand with classic design and luxurious comfort. It's our way of sharing hope and inspiration from the world of Shenyun. We bring you Shenyun Dancer. Wear it with honor.
A product testing company is offering to pay you $2,400 to stay away from screens for 24 hours. Reviews.org is holding a 24-hour digital detox challenge. It says it'll pay challengers who can survive a whole day without screens. We're not just talking phones and mobile devices. You also have to stay away from televisions, computers, and smart devices. You can apply for the detox through March 26th on Review's website, and choosing contestants will be given a safe to lock up their devices and a $200 Amazon gift card for a tech-free survival kit. The company will announce the winners on its YouTube channel next Monday. And Dunkin is giving free donuts to its rewards program members to help them get over the hump on Hump Day. Dunkin announced today it's launching free Donut Wednesdays nationwide. On Hump Day, DD Perks members who buy a drink can indulge in a free donut. That includes favorite flavors like Boston cream, double chocolate. The special starts this Wednesday at participating locations around the country and runs through April 21st. And Hollywood's making a comeback. Theaters are now reopening, tourists trickling in. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on that.
It's starting to look a little less like a pandemic and more like spring break in Hollywood. California's COVID-19 positive tests and death rates have fallen dramatically since January, so much that some theaters have officially reopened. Abraham Maritas taking in the weather.
Well, it feels awesome because you're not back at home anymore. You're able to go out and enjoy the sun, the weather, be able to see other people again, I guess.
The fear factor doesn't appear very strong here, but preventative measures are still in place. Los Angeles County, home to Hollywood, requires masks in work and public spaces. Rose Espinosa's played it safe, even when she didn't have to.
We're actually trying to keep our distance from other people with precautions, because I know California is one of the top places that the COVID is really high and the cases are high. But down in Texas, everything is actually open 100%. So, but we actually still wear our mask and still sanitize and everything else as well.
William Turner says he's trying to live it up.
I'm only here because I'm on vacation. People said Los Angeles was a place to be for vacation or just to go sightseeing. So I'm here to see what the hype is about, and so far I'm loving it. I'm living up to the hype.
Maybe you've spent a lot of time locked up at home watching Netflix. Well, Todd Tickering was just on his way out of the El Capitan Theater, and he says the in-person experience isn't just better, it's important.
For a full year of watching things in your home, it just isn't the same experience. The sound, and especially a movie like this that has so much color and such a lush score, it's important to see it in the theaters and support them.
Most of the state's counties are still in the substantial risk category. California's state health officials are taking a cautious approach to reopening.
That's the latest business updates for today. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.